We've been going through all of the various karbanos and describing the particulars related to each of them. So yesterday we learned the Mishnah that we've moved on now from the Kadshe Kadashim to talk about things that are Kadshim Kalim, and we're talking about two categories of karbanos. One is the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor, which is the shlamim that are brought by the tzibor, by the full community, and the hashamos. So we described in the Mishnah what the different hashamos are. The Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor were as I mentioned yesterday, the two animals that were brought along with the Shtei Alechem, as well as other karbanos, including a chatas, and you'll see in a moment why I referenced the chatas. But in any event, the Gemara begins and wants to know minalan debayit tzafon. How do I know that it needs to be done in the north? Because the Mishnah says shchitasam betzafon v'kibol damam b'chlisharis betzafon, that both the shchita and the kabbalah need to be in the north. Now, as you'll recall at the beginning, that we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the parak talking about the obligation of north, and in fact we learned the obligation of north as relates to an asham. But what the Gemara is asking now is, how do I know by the Shalmei Tzibor, which is the ksavim that the kvasim that is by the Shtei Alechem on Shavuos. So the Gemara says the Tani Rabba bar Rav Chanan Kamei de Rabba. The Rabba bar Rav Chanan learned in front of Rabba. Vasisem Sir Izim Echad Lechatos. So this pasuk is this pasuk in Vayikra Chav Gimel. It says Asisem Sir Izim Echad Lechatos Ushnei Chavasim B'nei Shana LeZevach Shlomim. So it says that it's talking about on Shavuos that you need a sa'ir for a chatas and you need two chvasim for the shlamim. So you see a hekesh between the same pasuk talks about the sa'ir that was a chatas, and it also talks about these two animals that were brought as the Shalmei Tzibor on Shavuos. So ma chatas betzafon av Shalmei Tzibor betzafon. So since we have a hekesh between the sa'ir and the chvasim, that you see that just like the chatas, or the sa'ir, which was a chatas, needed to be in the north, so too did the Shalmei Tzibor need to be in the north. So hopefully all of you should have an immediate question, which the Gemara asks next. Amar lei Rava, v'chi chatas mehechan lamda. He said, where did we know that a chatas needed to be in the north? Me'ola. We learned it out from Ola. Ola is the place where it expressly says the north, and the chatas was learned from that. And we know, because we're experts in this, davar alamed behekesh, chozer malamed behekesh. Well, this is actually in the form of a question. Can you say that something that was learned with a hekesh, you can go and extend it with another hekesh? We went through the 16 categories, and we knew the first one, and the one we had spent time on even before the 16, was that you cannot learn things out from a double hekesh. So here, what do you have? You have a chiyuv of tzafon, the requirement of north that's written by an ola, and it's extended from ola to chatas via hekesh, and we're trying to use a hekesh to extend it from chatas to the from the sa'ir that was a chatas on Shavuos to the two chavasim that we're talking about now. So you have a double hekesh, and a double hekesh doesn't work. So we say elam editani Rav Mari breder Rav Kahana. So rather, instead of learning it out from a hekesh between chatas and these two animals brought with the Shtei Alechem, rather learn it out more directly. So where do they learn it out from? The pasuk says, the Gemara says, Al olosechem ve'al zivchei shalmechem. Now actually, this is a pasuk in Bamidbar, which all of you are familiar with, although you might not remember why, because this is the pasuk that we say on Rosh Hashanah in Shofros, I think. We say Uv'yom simchaschem v'moadechem uv'roshei chadshechem, that when it's your days of joy and your holidays and the Rosh Chodashim, usekatem b'chatzotzros al olosechem al zivchei shalmechem v'hayu lachem l'zikaron l'fnei elokechem ani Hashem elokechem. So it says that you blow the chatzotzros. We'll see the significance of that in a moment. Al olosechem al zivchei shalmechem, on your olos and on your shlamim, right? So now the question is, so how do we know that that's talking? So you see there a hekesh between an ola and a shlamim, al olosechem al zivchei shalmechem. So you have a hekesh there, which is a direct hekesh between an ola and a shlamim. So therefore, instead of what we were doing, which was we were learning shlamim from chatas and chatas from ola, we're now learning shlamim from ola. But how do we know that this shlamim is a reference to these two animals that we brought on Shavuos? So Rashi explains that when it says "Usukatem b'chatzotzros," that you're going to blow on your trumpets. So what was the business about trumpets? Is because trumpets were used in the shear that accompanied karbanis. And Rashi, starting at the end of the second line, says Al karchoch b'shalmei tzibur ksiv. He says it has to be talking about our two animals. She'ein karban yachid tan kli shir. She'ein amrim shir al karban yachid. Kid amr be'erechin. We learned in the Gemara in Erechin that the only time that they said shir on a karban was when it was a karban of the tzibur, not when it was a karban of the yachid. And we finished talking about before that what's the only case we have zivchei shamei tzibur, that we have a shlamim that belongs to the tzibur, is the two animals that were brought on Shavuos. So from the fact that it talks about a shlamim in the context of a pasuk that has klei shir, that has musical instruments, we know that we're talking about the two chavasim of Shavuos, and you see that there's a hekesh because it says al olosechem v'al zivchei shamechem. So you see a hekesh between ola and shlamim of Shavuos. So therefore, we can learn out directly ma ola kadshei kadeshim as zivchei shamot tzibur kadshei kadeshim. Just like since we have a hekesh between the ola and these zivchei shamot tzibur, we're going to say that just like the ola is kadshei kadeshim, so are these two animals brought on Shavuos. And continues the limud ma ola betzafon av zivchei shamei tzibur betzafon. And just like the ola, the carbon ola, is brought in the north, because that's actually, as we said before, the source, the primary source for learning out that it has to be shechted in the north. So from the hekesh, the direct hekesh between the two animals of Shavuos to the halachas of Ola, which is where we know the source of north, that's how we know that the Zivchei Shamei Tzibur had to be shechted in the north. Okay, so the Gemara says, fine. So you ended up making a hekesh between Ola and the Zivchei Shamei Tzibur. But before that, we had made a hekesh between the Chatas and the Zivchei Shamei Tzibur, and we initially tried to use that in a two-step hekesh, which we discredited. But the Gemara now wants to know, okay, but there's still, the pasuk makes a hekesh by talking about the vasisem sir izem echad lechatos ushnei chavasim b'nei shana zevach shlamim, that there's a hekesh between chatos and shlamim. We didn't need it for what we brought it for before. So what in fact do you do? The Gemara says hekesha kamal mayasa. What do you use that first hekesh for? So the Gemara says it's coming to tell you ki chatos, that this shlamim, the zivchei shamei tzibur, the two animals that were brought together with the shtei alechem, are like a chatos. Ma chatas einin nechelas el zichrei kohuna av zivchei shamei tzibur le zichrei kohuna. So it's coming to tell you that just like a chatos that we know is eaten by the zichrei kohuna, by the male kohanim, so too zivchei shamei tzibur are brought by the male kohanim. Amarle Abaye says, I have a problem with that limud. He says, Ihachi, if that's a valid limud of a hekesh, if you're going to say that when you have a chatas compared to a shlamim, that you should learn from there that it has to be eaten by the kohanim and by the male kohanim. So he says, if so, I should apply similar language, gabe el nazir, by a nazir. So we know, as we're about to bring in the pasuk, that a nazir, when he completed his naziros, he would bring 3 karbanos. He would bring a ola, a chatas, and the el nazir, which was a shlamim. The chsiv, because it's written, v'hikrev es karbano l'Hashem. He would bring his carbon l'Hashem. Keves ben shnasot samim echad la'ola, that he would bring a keves for an ola, v'chavsa achas bashnasa tamima lachatas. So there would be one animal brought as a chatas. So we have an ola and a chatas. V'ayel echad tamim l'shlamim. That you would have v'ayel echad tamim l'shlamim. That you would have also an ayel. That you would bring a ram for shlamim. So you have 3 karbanos. Now what happens? You have now in the same pasuk a reference to chatos, the chatos that's brought by the nazir, and we also have a reference to the shlamim. So he says as follows: Hachinami nema the hekish hakasav lechatos. So why not say that just like we saw that if you have in the same pasuk a chatos and a shlamim are brought together, that you should learn a hekish and say ma chatos ein nechelos el zichrei kahuna af el nazir nami ein nechel el zichrei kahuna. So say just like a regular chatas gets eaten by the male kohanim, so too the el shlamim, the el nazir should get eaten by the zichrei kahuna. But what's the problem with that? So you can give you a little preview. If you look down a few lines, the first wide line, there's a Mishnah, which learns Hatoda ve'el Nazir. So it's talking about the El Nazir. Talks Kachim Kalin Shechitasim Chol Makam Azav Dam Tayin Shtei Matan Shein Arba. And then it says V'nechalam b'chol ha'ir l'chol Adam. It can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim by any person. So we see in the Mishnah that that's not true. An El Nazir is not eaten only by the Zichrei Kahuna. So if this is a valid form of Hekish, and when you see a chatas and a shlamim together, you should learn that the shlamim has to be eaten by the zichrei kahuna. If so, we should conclude that the el nazir needs to be eaten by the zichrei kahuna. But yet, the Mishnah says it gets eaten by anyone. So this doesn't appear to be a good hekish. So the Gemara says, hachi hashta. How can you compare it? Hasam kivan dechsiv v'lakach hakoines azroa b'shela min ha'ayil. So it says that this is a pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Vav. It says that the Kohen takes the cooked the zroa b'shelo, the cooked zroa. So this is the front leg of the animal that they would cook it and give it to the Kohen. Michlal the kule bailam achlile. So the Gemara says as follows: it's not a problem if I learn out, generally speaking, when a chatas and a shlamim are put together, that I should learn, just like the chatas is eaten by the zichrei kahuna, so too the shlamim. But why don't I do that by El Nazir? And why by El Nazir do we say that it can get eaten by anyone? It's not because my hekish is wrong. It's because there's a specific pasuk which says that by an El Nazir that you give the cooked front leg to the Kohen. So the Gemara is saying the implication of that is everything else other than the cooked front leg, as besides the things that the emurim, or besides the chaz of a shok that get given to the Kohen. But in other words, you basically see that the Torah is saying this specific thing, the zroa b'shela, gets given to the Kohen. It implies that everything else is not given to the Kohen and therefore goes to individuals. So there's nothing wrong with my hekish. It's just that in the case of an El Nazir, the Torah came and overrode that hekish by saying, in fact, it should not be limited to the zichrei kahuna, but rather should be or could be eaten by anyone. So the Gemara says, if you're right, so fine. So tell me that the Torah excluded the rest of the carbon and said that needs to be eaten by that could be eaten by anyone. But yet the Torah assigned. It says, but zra b'shela mia lola hisacha zichrei kahuna. He says, but okay, so fine. You're saying most of the carbon goes to regular people. That's what the Torah is coming to tell you. But if you're right that when you have in one pasuk a chatas and a shlamim together, you could learn that the shlamim is only eaten by the zichrei kahuna. So why not say that this zroa b'shela of the El Nazir, which does get given to the Kohen, so say at least that which is given to the Kohen should be able to be eaten only by the male Kohanim and not by the family of the Kohanim. So the Gemara says, kasha, that's a good kasha. As we've learned many times, most people understand that kasha means that's a challenging question to which we don't, but it's not the same as a tiyufta. It doesn't uproot it. Okay, the Gemara says v'bais ema, or I'll tell you another answer. It says kad she ikri, kad she kadashim lo ikru. So he says as follows, that you see that the El Nazir is referred to. He says kad she ikri zori b'shela. He says this cooked front leg is called kadosh. Umidalog siv kadshe kadashim. Rashi says, since it's not written kadshe kadashim, shmamina lo iskish lechatos lahachi de tahave ele chumra de kadosh kadashim. He says the behedya miyate midechsiv kadosh lo ksiv kadashim. So he says as follows, that from the fact that the Torah generally refers to something that's kadosh kadashim by that term, and here it only calls it kadosh. So you cannot learn from there that it should be treated like kadshe kadashim. Now Rashi actually brings. He says, well, that's interesting. He says But if so, then by the Shamei Tzibor, which we do learn out, it's also written Kodesh, and it's not written Kodshei Kodeshim. So Rashi says that's different because it's written Kodesh Lashem. And Kodesh Lashem, it could perhaps, or is perhaps different than is more similar to Kodshei Kodeshim than it is to Kodesh. So in any event, our first answer to why the Zroa B'Sheila doesn't get limited to the Zichrei Kahuna, shouldn't it, because of the Hekesh, we said Kasha. The second answer is saying no, because the Torah, by referring to it as Kodesh, as opposed to Kodshei Kodeshim, was coming specifically to tell you that it doesn't have that limitation generally associated with Kodshei Kodeshim, that it needs to be eaten specifically by the Zichrei Kahuna. So two answers to that question. So the Gemara says, Ela lamai hilchasa iskish. So then, fine. You're telling me that I do not use that hekesh of the El Nazir, which was a shlamim, to the chatas to teach us this halacha, because the Torah is specifically telling us. Thank you. The Torah is specifically telling us that I don't use the El Nazir with the chatas because the Torah is specifically telling us it can be eaten by anyone. So then, what do I do with that hekesh that we have the same pasuk that brings the El Nazir together with the Chatas? Amar Rava says, Shem Gilach al Echad Mishlashtan Yatza, that if he shaves his head on one of the three, he's Yotze. What is this talking about? It's probably useful to look at Rashi, the last Rashi, a little bit of a long Rashi before the Gemara, before the next Mishnah. It says, Shem Gilach al Echad Mishlashtan Yatza. He says, V'chatas hu diyalfi mishlamim. He says, what we were thinking until now was the Shlamim was learning something from the Chatas. He says now it's actually the other way. The Chatas is learning something from the Shlamim. Ma el Nazirim heviu yechidi below Chatas v'ola yatza. He says as follows, that the Nazir would bring 3 karbanos, and he would also shave his head as part of the process. So we say as follows, that if he brought only the Shlamim and he did not bring the Chatas and Ola, at that point he can cut his hair. Because it's written V'acher yishte hanazir yayin, that afterwards the Nazir can drink wine. V'amar mar b'sifri acher ma'ase yechidi, after one single action. V'hainu shlamim. He says that the Torah learns that after the shlamim has been brought, so at that point the Nazir still needs to bring other karbanas, but he can then proceed. It's the only carbon that precludes him from moving forward, or that was how we would learn initially. Sheikar taglachto shel nazir tluya b'shlamo shari huzkuku lo l'shalach saaro tachas hadud. He says what's the connection? Why specifically the shlamim needs to be done before everything else? Because before cutting the hair, because in fact you see that you're supposed to shech the shlamim, and then you use the hair. The hair of the Nazir goes into the fire under the pot. So you see that the shlamim needs to be brought, should be brought before or in connection with the hair. So he says as follows: there's a connection between the hair and between the hair and the shlamim. V'tanya b'sifri v'gilach hanazir pesach omoid b'shlamim hakasim medaber. So he says as follows, that it says that the Nazir, the way the pasuk sounds, is that the Nazir should cut his hair at the Pesach of the Ol Moed. That was written by the Shlamim. He says, Kolomar gilucho shel Nazir ayidei davar shenemar b'v'shachet Pesach Ol Moed. V'hainu Shlamim. He says that's really a reference to the Shlamim when it talks about cutting the hair. Why? Because by its reference, it sounds like you should cut the hair at the Pesach Ol Moed. But what we learn in the Sifri, that no, what it means is that that you should cut the hair in connection with the carbon that is brought Pesach Ol Moed. So the Gemara says, Pesach Ol Moed mamish. Maybe it means literally you should cut the hair at the Pesach Ol Moed. The Gemara says, it's not nice to do haircuts at the Pesach Ol Moed. So what do we see? We see that first of all there's a connection between the shlamim and cutting the hair, because the shlamim is supposed to get the hair in the fire underneath it. And we see that the cutting of the hair is connected to the carbon that's brought on the Pesach Ol Moed, which is the shlamim. So from that, the Gemara learns over there that once the shlamim is brought, that you could then cut the hair and do the remaining process. And in fact, the pasuk says you could drink wine. But in any event, you see that the shlamim is the critical first step. So now the Gemara is saying, Once I knew that the shlamim was the critical first step, and after the shlamim you could do these others. The others have to follow, but they're not ma'akev. So he says from this fact that there's a hekesh between the shlamim and the chatas, so then it teaches that just like by the shlamim, it's enough to do one carbon and then you'll bring the other two later, but you could cut the hair, etc. So too, if you do any one of the three karbanas, that just like a shlamim, and in fact, you see the pasuk has written in it, the shlamim and the chatas and the ola. So you see that just like the shlamim, once you finish the shlamim, you could cut the hair and do the remaining things, the things that were previously yisurim during his nazirus. So too, the same is true. It's not unique to shlamim, even though the limud we learned out was specifically for shlamim. The hekesh between chatas and shlamim tells you that if you bring any one of the three karbanas, you can then cut the hair or drink the wine, etc. Okay, next Mishnah. Hatoda ve'el nazir kadeshim kalim. Said a toda, which people brought for Thanksgiving, the 4 different things. That he was saved from something. The el nazir that we just talked about. Kadeshim kalim, they are kachim kalim. Shchitasim b'chol makom azara. They can be shechted anywhere in the azara. V'daman toin shtei matana shein arba, and this has that 2 opposite diagonal corners that you would do the 2 applications of dam that are like 4. V'nechalim b'chol ha'ir. It gets eaten it can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. L'chol adam, to any person, meaning even to non-kohanim. B'chol machol, in any form of food preparation. So we've talked about this before, as distinct from a carbon pesach, which we'll see needs to be roasted. Liyom v'layla ad chatzos, for 1 day and 1 night till chatzos. And Rashi points out, b'todach siv b'yom karbono ye'achel. So it says you should eat it on the day of the carbon, but it then proceeds to say you shouldn't leave it over to the next morning, which tells you that you have a day and a night. V'tanya, we learned a brisa, Toda Shlomov l'rabo shalmei nazir. So it says Toda, so that is obviously how we know it for Toda. And we had earlier, the Gemara talked about, we had this Gemara on Daf Lamed Vav, that Todas Shlomov is a hekesh between the shlamim of the Nazir and the Toda. So you see that both of these karbanas that are being discussed in this Mishnah have the 1 day and night following Ad Chatzos, as we've learned, that's to be a siyag. Hamura mehem, now we're adding a new element to these Mishnayos. Hamura mehem ki yotze behen, ela shamurim nechel kahanim l'shem l'bneim l'avdeim. He says as follows, that which is removed from it, which is given to the Kohen, is just like the carbon itself. The fact that you give the Kohen his parts of the carbon doesn't then invest it with more kedusha or anything, and rather it can be eaten by him in the same places as long as it's in Yerushalayim. It can be prepared anyway. The only difference is that which is separated to the Kohanim is limited to be eaten by the Kohen and his wife and his children, Lavdeim, and his Evet Kenani, who is part of his property. Okay, says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. So what we're going to talk about here is how do you know that these things, the shlamim, can be eaten in Yerushalayim, anywhere in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, Es chazeyat tnufa ve'ashok hatruma tochlu b'makom tahar. That the breast that gets waved, because there's a waving process, that the Kohen and they wave the breast of the animal, ve'ashok hatruma, and the thigh that's given to the Kohen, tochlu b'makom tahar. You should eat in a place that's tahar. Rav Nechemya. So Rav Nechemya. Okay, so now this pasuk is written, as Rashi points out, but Parshas Vayihi Bayam Hashmini. What was going on in Parshas Shmini was talking about the Chanukah Sabayis of the Mishkan. So basically, they were on the end of when they were end of the dedication of the Mishkan, they brought certain karbanos, and it says that the tenufa, the chaza v'shok should be eaten in a makom tahar. So when you say it should be eaten in a tahar place, is that implying that the karbanos that were brought before, for example, the mincha, which we're going to see in a minute, does that mean that was eaten betuma? So ela tahar michlal shehu tameh. So he says, from the fact that it says tahar, it tells you that it's tameh, which is a a limud that only a Talmudist could love, right? It says tahar means tameh. What's going on? Because the pasuk before is written kadosh, right, by the mincha, and here it's saying it's tahar. So tahar implies that it is holy, but it is not kodesh, which implies that there's some element of tumah here. It's still tahar at some level, but it's also tameh at some level. So what does that mean? The Gemara says tahar mitumas mitzora, v'tameh mitumas zav. That it's tahar in as much as a mitzora can't be in this area, but it's tameh, this area where it has to be eaten is tahar, that a mitzora can't be there, but it's tameh in the sense that a zav is allowed to be there. Ve'ezeh, what area is this that cannot have a mitzora but can have a zav? Zeh machne Yisrael. This is the machne Yisrael. So we're saying as follows. So the pasuk tells us three forms of people that shouldn't be there. That shouldn't be in the kadosh, which is someone who's tamei lemeis, someone who's a zav, and someone who's a mitzora, right? And so we learn as follows, that in the times of the when the Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar, we've talked about this before, that you had basically the Mishkan area you had the Mishkan area, which was the center. Around it, you had the Machane Levia, which was where the Levium were, who were surrounding the Mishkan. And then you had the Klal Yisrael, who were camped all around. And then you had outside of that, right? And so we learned as follows, that a Mitzora, it says he has to be entirely outside. So he was outside the camp altogether. And then we learned that a Zav, who's the next level of most serious separation. So he was allowed to be in the Machane Yisrael, but he couldn't be in the Machane Levia. And then someone who was Tamei Lemeis, we see from Atzmos Yosef that Moshe Rabbeinu had the bones of Yosef together with him. And where did Moshe Rabbeinu reside? He resided in the Machane Levia. So you see, Machane Levia can have Tamei Meis, but it can't have someone who's has Tumas Zav. Okay, now so that was in the midbar. What's the parallels in the Beis Hamikdash? So the Heichel was the Kodesh, just like the Ohel Moed. Then the Beis Hamikdash complex was the equivalent of the Machane Levia, and Yerushalayim was the equivalent of the Machane Yisrael. Right? So now, if we're looking for the area that is both Tameh and Tahar, where it is Tameh in as much as a Zav is able to be there, but it's Tameh that a Zav can be there, but it's Tahar in as much as the Mitzora can't be there, because the Mitzora has to be outside. So what is that? That was the Machane Yisrael. The Mitzora had to be outside altogether, but the Zav could come into the Machane Yisrael. Okay, so we see that we're talking about an area that's okay for a Zav and not okay for a Mitzora. What was that? That was Machane Yisrael. Now, what's the parallel to Machane Yisrael in the Beis HaMikdash? Was Yerushalayim. So therefore, you see that a shlamim can be eaten in Yerushalayim, because you see that when Aaron was told to eat it in a Makom Tahar, meant you could eat it in the Machane Yisrael. So the Gemara says, "Ve'ema tahar mitumas zav, v'tamei mitumas meis, ve'ezeh zeh Machane Levia." He says, well, wait. Maybe a shlamim can only be eaten in the Beis HaMikdash complex. Why? Because you're telling me that it says b'makom tahar in a place that's tahar, which means it is tahar in one sense and tameh in another. So why not say that it's talking about a Machane Levia, which is tameh in the sense that a tameh mace can be there, but it is tahar in the sense that neither a zav nor a mitzora could be there. In other words, if you're saying you have a limud that says a place that's both tahar and tameh, so how do you know that it should be? How do you know it should be Machane Yisrael? Maybe it should be Machane Levia. So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'chaltem oso b'makom kadosh. So it says that you should eat it, osa, it, b'makom kadosh. What is this referring to? This is referring to the mincha that they had brought earlier. So that implies that you have a flour offering. This flour offering should be eaten kadosh, in kadosh. This tells you that this bread offering of the mincha or the flour offering in the mincha should be brought in makom kodesh, and other ones should not. So afke lemachane levia. So therefore, the other kinds of flour offerings, which include the Toda brought its 40 loaves of bread, and the El Nazir brought 20 loaves of bread. So that implies that the Toda and El Nazir cannot be in the Beis Hamikdash. I'm sorry, in the Kodesh. So that had to go out to the Machna Leviah. So, okay, so now, without having resorted to the pasuk that says Makom Tahar, just from the fact that it says that you should eat the mincha in a Makom Kadosh, I know that the mincha gets eaten in the Makom Kodesh, that the Toda and the El Nazir get eaten in the Machna Leviah, right? I know that from the pasuk Yochatam also b'Makom Kadosh. Hadar Ksiv, but then it's subsequently written b'Makom Tahar, which tells you that it's a level beneath. So in other words, we heard before that Tahar means Tahar in one sense, Tamei in another sense. So you see that it is loosening the restrictions. So therefore, the pasuk Yochatam also b'Makom Kadosh puts the Toda and the El Nazir in the Machna Leviah. Now that you add in the words b'Makom Tahar, it takes it out one more level to the Machna Yisrael. Afke Machna Yisrael. It takes it out to the Machna Yisrael. That's Abaya's limud. That's how he learns that it gets eaten. That the Toda and El Nazir can be eaten, and for that matter, all Shlomim and all Kachim Kalim are learned out can be eaten in Yerushalayim. Okay, so that's Abaya's source. Rav Amar Rava says. Osaba Makom Kodesh v'lacheres b'Makom Kodesh. So it says by the mincha needs to be eaten in the Makom Kodesh. So the way Rava understands that, Afke Lagamri. So therefore, from that pasuk alone, I would know that it's the mincha that gets eaten in the Makom Kadosh, and everything else, including the Toda and the El Nazir, can be eaten anywhere. Can be eaten anywhere you like. Hadar Kasav Rachmana Tochlu b'Makom Tahar Ailo l'Machna Yisrael. So he's not arguing on the din. He's saying you can learn. He's just saying that Kadosh tells you that the mincha is Kadosh. Everything else is outside entirely. But since it says b'Makom Tahar, that it's taking it up a level and bringing it into Machna Yisrael, into Yerushalayim. So he agrees with Yerushalayim. He just gets to there in a different place. I guess that Rava felt it's kind of funny that you look at the words b'Makom Tahar to take it down a level. It seems to be something taking it up a level. So he's saying Kadosh, the negative inference of Kadosh puts it outside entirely, and Makom Tahar brings it back into Machna Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Ve'ema Ayla Machna Leviah. He says, okay, but if you have Makom Tahar, let's say you're right, that Kadosh, the negative inference, puts the Toda and the El Nazir outside altogether, meaning even outside Yerushalayim, and then Makom Tahar brings it back in. But why are you saying it brings it back into Machna Yisrael? Maybe it should bring it into Machna Leviah, and you would have to eat it in the Beis HaMikdash complex, and not just in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, L'choda ma'alinon, l'tarti lo ma'alinon. So he says as follows, that we can bring it up one level, but not two levels. So therefore, once Kadosh puts us outside altogether, Makom Tahar brings us up one level into Yerushalayim, into the Machna Yisrael. So the Gemara says, no, sorry, that doesn't work. He's saying, if you're telling me that a limit of a pasuk can only move you one level, you have a problem, because you had Kadosh, you said the mincha is Kadosh, and I'm going to exclude the Toda and the El Nazir to put it outside altogether, right? So where you jumped multiple levels there to take it out, so why are you saying that when Makom Tahar brings it back in, it can only move one level? That's the first problem. So this is written by the psukim. We say lo sucha lecha b'sharecha masa degancha siroshcha v'tzarecha b'choris b'karecha v'tzornecha v'chol nedarecha shetidar v'nidvasecha trumas yadecha. So it tells you both by a bechor and by meiser and by nedarim and nedavos that were shlomim, that all of them, it said you cannot eat them in your gates. Why? Because you have to eat them in Yerushalayim. So you see, what was the havamina you had? In other words, if you're saying Kadosh tells you that it takes it outside altogether, you see from the pasuk that you cannot eat it outside. So we would know it can't be going outside of Yerushalayim, and we would know it's Yerushalayim. We wouldn't need the pasuk of Makom Tahar to take you into Yerushalayim, El Machvarta Kedabaya, because of these two questions. A, that if you're telling me it can't jump two levels to go up into Machna Leviah, why was it able to jump down multiple levels? And also, what was the Havamina that you needed a pasuk to take it out of the area outside of Yerushalayim into Yerushalayim or into Machna Yisrael? Okay, so we go with Abaya's version and not with Rava. Okay, says the Mishnah, Shlomim Kache Kalim. So regular Shlomim, talking about something that someone brings, that a Yachid brings. So we're not talking anymore about Shalmei Tzibor, But a shlamim or kachim kalim shechitasim chol makam azara can be shechted anywhere in the azara, not just in the north. V'daman shtei matan shein arba, it has the two that is 4 blood applications. V'nechalim b'chol ha'ir, it's eaten in all of the city of Yerushalayim, l'chol adam, for any person, b'chol machol, in any form of food preparation, l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. So the pasuk is very clear by a shlamim, unlike everything we've been learning until now, which has to be eaten by the night that follows the day it was brought. In this case, you have the following day as well. So if someone brought it on a Monday, they could eat it Monday night, and all day Tuesday till the end of the day Tuesday, but not Tuesday night. Hamura mehem, that which is separated from the shlamim and given to the Kohen, ki yotzei behem, has similar rules as the regular shlamim, ela shamurim nechel kohanim l'shem l'vneim l'avdam. But the distinction of that which is separated to the Kohen is that since it was given to the Kohen, it can only be eaten by him and his wife and his children and his avadim kinanim. Okay, says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, v'shachatu pesach ol moed, v'shachat oso lefnei ol moed, v'shachat oso lefnei ol moed. So basically, you have, as we've encountered multiple times, that there's multiple parshas written by the shlamim. So as Rashi says, he says, Shalosh Parshas B'Shlamim. There's 3 parshas written by Shlamim. Chada b'ben bakar. One is if you bring a ben bakar. V'chada b'ben kesef. If you bring a kesef. V'chada be'ez, with a goat. So so he's saying 3 times it's written that you should bring the carbon, you should shecht it by the Ol Moed. But the distinction is, by the first one it says V'shachatu Pesach Ol Moed, that you should do it at the doorway of the Ol Moed. The next 2 say V'shachat also Lefnei Ol Moed. So it switches the language from Pesach Ol Moed to Lefnei Ol Moed. So the Gemara says, the Brisa says, Lahachshir es kol haruchos bekadshim kalim. So he says, this is coming to tell you that by kadshim kalim, that you can go in every direction. Now, what is this going to mean? We're going to see this in more detail, but it means that when let's say you were standing at the Heichal looking out to the Mizbeach, anything you could see, which is basically everything from the front of the Ulam to the other side, till you get to the Ezra's Nashim, I guess, that you would, anywhere there that's within sight of the Ulam, you can bring the carbon that's a shlamim. Because remember, you don't require north by shlamim because it's kachim kalam. All right, we're going to get into this in more detail in the Gemara, but okay, so let's go. And then he says, kavachomer. He says, kavachomer litzafon. He says, Uma kadshe kadashim shlo hochshuru b'chol haruchos hochshuru b'tzafon. Now he's going to try and prove that you're able to bring kachim kalam in the north. He says, because if kachim kalam, which could not be, kadshe kadashim, which could not be brought anywhere in the area over there other than the north of the Mizbeah, the north part, he says, Kachim kalam shehochshur b'chol haruchos ein odin shehochshur b'tzafon. He says, so if there's more kedusha of the north, that's the only place you could bring kadshe kadashim, right? And you could not bring kadshe kadashim in any other part. So then, if kachim kalam can be brought in any other part, for sure they should be able to be brought even in that place that has more kedusha. Now, why does he need to bring a kavachomer at all? So Rashi says because he's trying to foreclose what Rabbi Eliezer is about to say. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo nemar akasav el hachshir tzafon. He says the reason you have that extra pasuk is in order to say that you can actually shecht in the north. Okay? So what's the difference so far? Is that the Tanakama was saying, I know from a kavachomer that you can shecht in the north, and I'm using the pasuk Pesach Ol Moed to tell me anything that's in front of the Ol Moed. Rabbi Eliezer is agreeing that you can shecht anywhere in front of the Ol Moed, including the tzafon, but he requires a pasuk to tell it him. He doesn't buy the kavachomer. So what's the reason? Because he had a kavachomer which would have told him that you cannot shecht kachim kalam in the north. So therefore, he needed the pasuk to tell you can. And this is going to become more clear when we get to Amud Beis. He says, "V'alo dinhu." It's a kavachomer. Uma kachim kalam shehochshur b'chol haruchos lo hochshur mekamon etzo kadashei kadashim. He says that he understands that it is not that the area that's north is more kadosh. Rashi says this on Amud Beis. He says, "Who said?" In other words, where is this idea that the north is more kadosh? Rather, the way he understands it is that there is space designated for each of the karbanos. There's a space that's made for kachei kadashim, and there's a space that's made for kachim kalim. which happens more in the Beis HaMikdash? Kachim Kalim. So they assign more space to Kachim Kalim and less space to Kachei Kadashim. So what he's saying is as follows. I might think that if Kachim Kalim have all of this space that is given lo huchsher makomon etzel Kachei Kadashim, so he says Kachei Kadashim shelo huchsher elo b'tzafon eno din shelo huchsher makomon etzel Kachim Kalim. He says as follows, that if I designated space for Kachim Kalim, that you see Kachei Kadashim are not allowed to be shechted there, because we see that Kachei Kadashim can only be shechted in the north, and they can't be shechted in the area that's been designated for the Kachim Kalim. So then he says that for sure, this much smaller space that's been designated for the Kachei Kadashim, you should not be able to shecht Kachim Kalim there. So he understands that this has nothing to do with added Kedusha, it has to do with making space for everything. So there's a certain amount of space, a smaller amount of space for Kachei Kadashim, and you see the Kachei Kadashim aren't allowed to go into the Kachim Kalim space, so then the Kachim Kalim surely should not be able to go into the smaller Kachei Kadashim place. So Rabbi Eliezer is basically saying, I have a Kavach Chomer that would tell me I'm not allowed to bring Kachim Kalim in the north, hence I bring one of these three psukim to tell me I can. Versus the Tanakama took it for granted that of course you can do it in the north, and therefore he uses the pasuk to say that it covers the whole area. We'll see that they don't actually disagree in halacha, just in how they learn things. Okay. So the Gemara, so he says, because I might make that kavachomer tamalomar o moed, that it says pesach o moed, to tell me that that I can in fact bring it even in the north. All right, so what's going on here? The Gemara says, "But my kamifli, what's going on in this brisa?" So we say as follows: Tanakama savar, the Tanakama holds tlasa krai ksivi. He says there's three psukim written: Pesach ol moed, lefnei ol moed, lefnei ol moed. We said this before, right? So chad legufei dinibai Pesach ol moed. One is coming to tell you that you need a Pesach ol moed. That's why he uses the language of Pesach ol moed instead of lefnei ol moed. What's it telling you? It's telling you if there's no door to the Beis HaMikdash, then you can't bring the carbon. Why? What does it mean to be no door? So Rashi says three instances. One is by the Beis HaMikdash if the door is closed. One is in the Mishkan if the Kohanim hadn't set it up yet. And one is in the Mishkan before they traveled if the Kohanim have taken it down already. So basically it's telling you if there's no Pesach Ol Moed, then there's no carbon shlamim brought. V'chad lahachsher tzadin. And the Tanakama understands that one pasuk comes to tell you everything. If you're standing at the Ulam door, everything in front of you is area that you could check the Kachim Kalim. V'chad lifsul tzidei tzdadim. And one is coming to say that you can't have the tzidei tzdadim. What is the sides of the sides? Basically, when you looked out from the way Rashi understands it, there's different versions of this, but the way Rashi understands, even Rashi himself possibly has a different version, but if you're standing in the ulam and looking out, so you see everything, the area you're able to shecht it. But if you look along the walls, there were rooms that came off of that area. So you might think that since you don't take Pesach Ol Moed literally, which means that only what's immediately in front of the Pesach, but rather you say it covers everything you can see, so I might think it might include also those rooms. So it says the third pasuk, no, you can't go in those rooms, you can only do it in the area in front of the ulam. And he holds you don't need a pasuk for the north because he says it's a kavachomer, because he understands that it's kedusha, that it's limited because of the kedusha of Kodesh Kodeshim, and has to be limited to the north. But the Kachim Kalim, which has less kedusha, can be anywhere. Rabbi Eliezer uses the three psukim as follows: Chad legufei denibai Pesach Ol Moed. One comes to tell you need a door to the Ol Moed, and if you don't have a door, nothing doing, the carbon doesn't work. V'chad lahachsher tzafon. One, as we said before, he needed a pasuk to teach you that you could bring it in the north, because otherwise he would have applied his kavachomer to say you can't bring it in the north. V'chad lahachsher tzadin. V'chad lahachsher tzadin. And the other one, the third pasuk, comes to tell you everything you see in front of you when you're standing at the door of the ulam. So because he used an extra pasuk, the Tanakama had a pasuk to tell him tzidei tzdadim, those little chambers. He used that pasuk to tell you you're allowed to shecht in the tzafon. So he says, I didn't need a pasuk to tell me for those chambers, because that's not considered in the courtyard. That's Pesach Ol Moed. So what do you have? So what do you have here? You have that they're agreeing in the halacha. They're just arguing about how you get there. Maishna hacha d'chsid Pesach Ol Moed, Maishna hasam d'chsid lifnei Ol Moed. So he says, what's the difference? Why did it say Pesach Ol Moed by one and lifnei Ol Moed by the other two? So it really comes to tell you what I just told you. Kamash Malan could Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The fact that it said Pesach Ol Moed was coming to tell you that there needs to be a Pesach, which is what Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Dam Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Shlamim sheshachton kodem sheyifsechu delasos hahechel psulin. That if you shecht shlamim before you open the doors of the heichel, the carbon is pasul. Shenemar v'shachatu Pesach Ol Moed bisman shehu pasuach v'lo bisman shehu no'ol. That you have to bring the carbon when there's a Pesach. And Rashi points out a Pesach is an opening. It's not enough to be a doorway with a door, because that would be a deles. If it says shachatu Pesach Ol Moed, you have to be shechting it in an opening of the Ol Moed, which means that the doors to the Beis Hamikdash or to the Ol Moed needed to be open. It couldn't be closed, and that's why I said Pesach Ol Moed, to tell you that your carbon is no good if you don't have Pesach Ol Moed. Itmar Nami, this is to help me that you just repeat things. Itmar Nami, Amar Mar Ukva Bar Chama, Amar Rav Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Shlamim Sheshachatan Kodem Sheyifsechu Delasos Hahechel Psulan. The shlamim that you shech before you open the doors of the heichel are pasul. Shenemar v'shachatu Pesach Ol Moed, that you shechted at the doorway of the Ol Moed. Bisman shepesach heichel pasuach v'lo bisman shepesach shehu no'ol. Then not when it's open, not when it's closed. So exact same thing he's saying, and now it's going to help me further. B'marava masni hachi Amar Rav Yaakov Bar Acha. Amar Rav Ashi shlamim sheshachtan kodem sheyifsechu delasos hahechel psulan. That if you shecht the carbon before the doors get opened, it's pasul. Uve Mishkan, and in the Mishkan, this is where Rashi knew what he said before. Kodem sheyamidu leviim es hamishkan, alacher sheyifraku leviim es hamishkan. Before the Leviim built or constructed the Mishkan, or before they disassembled it, if you brought a carbon or perhaps any other carbon psula in there, psul, pasul. Okay, there we are. Says the Gemara. Pshita mugaf kina odami vilon mai. So the Gemara says it's pasha to me that that if the door is closed, it's like it's locked. This has very interesting applications in the halacha of yichud with the isha about whether the door needs to be locked or not, but obviously no time. So the Gemara says it's clear to me that if the door is closed, it's like it's locked. But what about if you have a curtain there? And in fact, in the Ol Moed there was a curtain. So Amar Rav Zera, hu atzmor in yanasis el kepesach pasuach. So he says that a curtain is really just there. You need a Pesach Pasuach, and it is a Pesach Pasuach. The curtain is just there for privacy. That's not really a door. Now the Gemara asks as follows: Govha mai. What happens if there's something blocking the entranceway? So you have a Pesach Ol Moed, but there's something in front of it that's blocking. What's the halacha? Tashma, coming here from the Brisa as follows: the sign Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Amar. Rabbi Yehuda said, Shnei pishpishin hayu bebeis hachalifos v'govan shmona. So what's going on here? So if you look as follows, that if you look at that little graph in the Gemara, you'll see that when you go into the ulam went to your right and left, 15 amos either direction, tesvav amma, either direction, before you got to the heichel. So the heichel was much narrower than the ulam, right? Now, the way we're learning as follows, if you see those two things, it shows on top of those extensions out of the ulam, there's something called a pishpesh. Then the pishpesh was basically a little opening that went to the things that are on the right and left of the heichel, right? So what was the point of that? That was the Beis HaChalifos. We know that when you talk about a guy who shechts, you say he has the chalif, the knife. So this is where they used to keep the knives there, right? And the point was as follows, that they had two little doors there. What was the purpose of those doors? Is because they wanted to make the area on the right and left of the heichel somewhere where you were allowed to shecht and call it Pesach Ol Moed. How did that work? Because Rashi points out, according to this Manda Amar, the ulam counts as the Ol Moed, and therefore, if you opened up two little entranceways there at the back where it says Pishpesh, so then it covers all of those areas behind the Ol Moed, behind the area we were talking about before, because there's an opening, and therefore the Pishpesh, these little windows were okay. But it says that the Pishpesh had 8 amos. So the Gemara is saying, doesn't that mean that, I'm sorry, so that's what the Brisa was saying. That's how you're able to eat Katshe Kadeshim at the Shecht Kachim Kalam there, is because that's considered Pesach Ol Moed, because it has an opening through this Pishpesh. My love, doesn't this mean that there was a pile of something, 8 amos in front of those doors, and yet we say that it counts to make it Pesach HaMoed. So the Gemara says, Lo, the Gavu Nenu Shmona, that the doorways themselves were 8 amos tall, not that there was something blocking. So no raya. The Gemara says, Meisvei Kol HaSharim Shal Yisham Govan Esr Nama V'Roch V'Nes Amos. How can you tell me that the doorways themselves were 8 amos tall? We see that all the doorways in the base of in the base of Mikdash are 20 by 10. So the Gemara says, Pishpish and Shani. He says that these little doors were different because their purpose wasn't to be a doorway. Their purpose was just to open up those space in order to say that you should be able to call that Pesach Ol Hamoed. So I'll have to pick up here Mirz Hashem tomorrow.